At first glance, the XC-Cycling slave cylinders may look like just another pair of trial slave cylinders, but there are quite a few design characteristics behind them that make them genuinely different. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Bike Cave. Today we are going to dive deep into some design characteristics of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders that make them unique. We are going to start with some obvious design characteristics, and then we are going to dive deeper into some more interesting but not so obvious design and manufacturing choices we've made to optimize the XC-Cycling slave cylinders. Now, some could say that I'm giving away some of the design decisions I made while designing the slave cylinders, but believe me, what we are going to discuss in this video is only a small part of what I can actually share publicly. So without further ado, let's start with a couple of things that can be observed right away just by looking at the XC-Cycling slave cylinders. Their design is based on olive connections, and that's why they have two M8 ports. This means that you cannot use barred fittings, and it also means that the XC-Cycling slave cylinders use a special bleeding plug. So you can only use rad nuts and olive fittings, and if you go with XC-Cycling rad nuts, they give you a very nice low-profile final assembly. They were designed like this for two reasons. First of all, I never liked bar fittings because the way the hose connects to them stresses the hose material and creates a weak area around the connection. That weak area is ready to fail if you hit it with your heel or during a crash. I bet many of you have been in this situation in the past, and I'm sure that losing braking power wasn't the best feeling. The second reason why each XC-Cycling slave cylinder has two identical ports is that this gives you greater flexibility to route the hoses in whatever way works best for you. Personally, I prefer keeping the hoses closer to the frame because that makes it less likely that I'll hit them while riding or during a crash. Finally, as already mentioned, you have to use a special bleed plug bolt that has been designed specifically for these slave cylinders. This bleed plug also features a quite lightweight design which contributes to the overall lightweight assembly of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders. The only thing you have to keep in mind about this bleed plug is that it has an O-ring, and it is this O-ring that seals the hydraulic system. This means that you do not have to over-tighten the bleed plug bolt to seal the system. You have to keep in mind that it only requires about 2 to 2.5 Nm. And note that if you over-tighten this bolt, you are going to damage the main body of the slave cylinders. That damage is not repairable, and it will void the 1-year limited warranty that you can get when you buy a set of XC-Cycling slave cylinders. The next thing that is instantly observable when you get the XC-Cycling slave cylinders in your hands is that they have large grooves on their body. The main reason for these wide and quite deep grooves was to reduce the weight of the slave cylinders while also improving the friction characteristics between the slave cylinder bodies and the brake clamps. So apart from the obvious weight saving, these grooves also make it easier for your brake clamps to hold the slave cylinders in place without having to over-tighten the clamp bolts. Keep in mind that if you over-tighten the bolts of the brake clamps, they will deform the slave cylinders and actually pinch the pistons inside them. As you can imagine, this will affect their smooth operation and cause a sticky piston effect. Also, if you excessively over-tighten the brake clamp bolts, you may permanently deform the body of the slave cylinders and actually damage it. And again, if you damage the main body of the slave cylinders, you won't be able to repair it. You will need a new pair, and this will also void their 1-year warranty and free service. So, you have to be very careful to avoid over-tightening the bolts of your brake clamps. And to do that, you should probably start using a torque wrench. The maximum recommended tightening torque for the bolts of your brake clamps is less than 4 Nm. Personally, I go for 3.5 Nm, but you should experiment and find the lowest tightening torque that works for you and your riding style without exceeding the maximum recommended value of 4 Nm. In general, you should go with the lowest torque value that works for you. And to do that, you also have to make sure that both the brake clamps and the slave cylinder bodies are as clean as possible with no oil residues or other contaminants that may affect the friction between them. Another obvious characteristic is that their overall shape is designed in such a way that their total volume is minimized. The XC-Cycling slave cylinders were designed with weight minimization in mind, and this idea affects all aspects of the design. From the overall shape to the material selection, the goal is to deliver the maximum braking performance possible while staying as lightweight as possible. Also, as mentioned before, if you use the XC-Cycling rad nuts, the overall 3D footprint of the slave cylinders is minimal, with the distance between the head of a properly tightened rad nut and the body of the slave cylinder being around 1 to 2 mm. This gives a very clean and minimal final assembly. The next obvious characteristic is that they are fully repairable, and this bolt takes everything apart. We've discussed many times in the past that the XC-Cycling slave cylinders are fully maintainable, and this is directly linked with both their performance and their reliability. The idea is simple. Making the XC-Cycling slave cylinders repairable allowed us to use a grease setup that gives us a very fast and snappy brake response. At the same time, it extends their life expectancy because now you can take everything apart, thoroughly clean all components, replace the seals that have been contaminated with dirt particles, and then re-grease and reassemble everything to get that like-new feeling back again. This can be done as often as you feel it is needed based on your riding needs. And at least for me, this is the most important design characteristic of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders. If your slave cylinders are not repairable, then you are basically stuck with a braking system that stops being as good as new from the moment you first ride it. And from there, the response gets worse every time you ride, until eventually you have to replace them with a brand new set. The next design decision I made while designing the XC-Cycling slave cylinders was to make them the first modular braking system for bike trials. This decision was made to let you, the rider, select the version that best fits your needs. I guess that at some point most riders may converge to just a few of the 8 different versions XC-Cycling has to offer. But it's always nice to know that there are more options out there if you want to experiment and optimize your braking feel based on your riding style and your personal preference. The available options can be divided into performance customizations and weight-saving customizations. Performance-wise, you can choose between different piston materials and springs with different stiffness. More specifically, you can get slave cylinders with pistons made out of 7075 T651 aluminum alloy or out of PETP, which is an engineering plastic. In general, I think that the aluminum pistons give a slightly stiffer feeling on the lever, while the plastic pistons feel a bit more forgiving. But this is just my personal opinion, and it will be better for you to feel the difference yourself and decide which one suits your riding style better. That said, I'm also working on a video where I compare all the different versions using a special test rig that I designed and built. So more on that in one of the upcoming videos. So make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss that one. The second customization has to do with the springs. The XC-Cycling slave cylinders can come with springs that are either almost regular or a bit harder than what you may be used to. In general, the harder springs make the pistons return a bit more sharply, but you may also feel a difference in the force needed to start moving the lever. Theoretically, this may also affect braking performance a little bit, but again, this is something that will be better understood once I finish the comparison video using the test rig I just mentioned. Apart from these performance customizations, there is also an additional weight saving option for those of you who care about marginal gains. If you want to save a bit more than 6 grams per pair, you can choose to get the rest of the parts that complete the slave cylinder assemblies made out of grade 5 titanium instead of 316 stainless steel. And at this point, I also have to mention that you can get the slave cylinders with the titanium hardware either during the initial purchase or later on as an upgrade kit whenever you decide that this upgrade is worth it for you. So from what we've discussed up to now, you can see that there are 8 different combinations of parts available to customize the XC-Cycling slave cylinders, and I'm pretty sure that you can find the one that best fits your riding style. And keep in mind that you can always contact me directly via social media if you need help clarifying anything before buying your XC-Cycling slave cylinders from the bikecave.eu shop. Now, for the last set of characteristics, we're going to go a bit deeper into a topic that seriously affects the performance of the XC-Cycling slave cylinders. Let's talk about the design decisions that were made to minimize friction between the pistons and the slave cylinder body, giving them that fast return speed and snappy feeling. Before I start talking again about the special seals grease that I developed for this project, I have to underline that the fight against friction started during the manufacturing process. So, apart from the proper tolerance of the parts and the finishing of both the bore of the slave cylinders and the external surface of the pistons, I also went the extra mile and I internally coated the slave cylinder bodies with tungsten disulfide. Tungsten disulfide is actually a solid lubricant, and when it is pulverized down to the micron level, it can be used to coat parts and dramatically improve their friction characteristics. And as a fun fact, tungsten disulfide has such a low dynamic friction coefficient that is widely regarded as one of the most lubricious materials known to man. Its coefficient of friction is lower than PTFE, graphite or molybdenum disulfide. Coating the inside of the slave cylinders is a manual process, so it has to be done very carefully to ensure that the coating has been properly applied. It's also quite a messy process because tungsten disulfide comes in the form of a micronized powder, so proper protective equipment has to be worn in order to ensure personal safety during the application process. But our battle against friction doesn't stop there. As I've already mentioned, I developed a special seals grease for this project, which is actually a mix of silicone grease and tungsten disulfide. And honestly, I believe this is one of the best seals grease setups you can have for this application. Using this grease, we can minimize the friction between the main body of the slave cylinders and the external surface of the pistons, including the seals, and get the fastest response possible. This tungsten disulfide enhanced seals grease, when used properly, can provide an extremely low coefficient of friction, while also helping renew the low friction condition on the internal surface of the slave cylinders. Another advantage of using grease is that the excess grease can trap most of the dirt particles that enter the interface between the piston and the slave cylinder bodies, and this can extend the period between full maintenance intervals. To wrap up today's video, oxycycling slave cylinders have been developed with attention to detail at every stage. Today we looked at some of the characteristics that make a real functional difference, from their minimal but practical design to their customizability to the obsession with reducing friction. Everything has led to a braking system that pushes performance forward. These slave cylinders have set a new standard in terms of braking performance by being the first fully repairable and customizable slave cylinders that are commercially available for bike trials. That's it for today, guys, and I hope you liked this one. If you are interested in getting your hands on a set of oxycycling slave cylinders, you can find them at our shop over at bikecave.eu. And if you want to ask any questions about the oxycycling slave cylinders, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thanks so much for subscribing and watching, and until next time, have fun riding your bikes and make sure that your brakes are always well maintained. Bye!